Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Cults to Consciousness. My name is Shelise Ansola. We are doing a live episode today, which is a follow-up to our interview with Jasmin Faulk-Dickerson. Thank you so much for joining us, Jasmin.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me back. I'm excited.
Yeah, your video was just soaring. Everyone loved you. I mean, of course, there's going to be people who disagree, always.
Of
and,
course.
and we're going to address some of those things, of
Yeah.
course. But you did such a great job, and everyone really related to your story. In fact, you were just telling me about the outpouring of messages that you personally got, and I would love to hear a little bit more about that before we dive into more of your past.
Yeah, I have to say, I think the most heartwarming part of, being able to be on the show and speaking was all the messages that I received after. Women who reached out that were appreciative and thankful because they felt like their story was being reflected. Many of the women did not necessarily feel like they were ready to speak. They were ready to share their stories. And so a lot of them, and this is private messages, not just in the comments, but a lot of private messages through all the formats that I can receive messages like email and LinkedIn and Instagram and through my website. It was really, really heartwarming to see the outpour of just feeling heard and feeling seen through my story. So that was really comforting. Many of them, reassured me that they were in a better place, in a better space. So that was great because some of them had also done similar things in their lives and made choices, very drastic choices in their lives. So that was really powerful. A couple of the messages were a little heart-wrenching because they are situations that are still very much in dire stress and
Mm.
don't necessarily have the tools or the currently maybe the I don't want to say the strengths, because just living in that situation is this strength itself, but maybe just like the readiness to move forward. So that was very, very beautiful.
Oh, I love hearing that. That is the unseen ripple effect that makes me want to keep going and keep pushing and keep interviewing because obviously it's a lot of work, but it's so meaningful. And so to hear that you're getting so many great messages, positive messages, it's so amazing. And to everyone here watching currently, thank you for being here and supporting and watching and liking and all the YouTubey things. Jonathan is at home with baby and he's going to be bringing comments onto the screen. Super chats are greatly appreciated. Not necessary, but they will be featured more often than the other comments. And all right, before we get into it, let's talk a little bit more about what we talked about originally in your first episode. In case someone is just now tuning in, you can go watch that after for more context. But Jasmin, give us like the nutshell version of your story.
Yes. So the nutshell version is I was born and raised in Saudi Arabia. So this is also answers some of the questions where I was born. I was born in Saudi Arabia. I grew up in Saudi Arabia. I lived in Saudi Arabia my whole childhood, my adolescence into my mid 20s. My mom is full blooded Italian. My dad was Saudi. And I am the product of the first generation of mixed Saudi children, mixed as in Saudi with Western moms from Europe and from the US and other Western world parts. My father was a student abroad in Italy. That's where he met my mom. And growing up in Saudi Arabia in the 70s and 80s and 90s, I grew up literally during the most fundamental extremist era of Saudi history. And we can go into that. I know I did not address it last time, but I'm happy to give you more context as far as the history and why that era was so oppressive and actually repressive as well to women especially. And during that time, of course, I had a crisis of identity. I struggled with the freedoms that I lacked. I struggled with being, a woman that was able to see the rest of the world, as it were, when I visited Italy, and wanting some of those freedoms for myself. And so in my mid 20s, I plotted my escape. And obviously, I won't go into all those details now because some of that was shared in the previous episode. And so ran away in the late 1990s successfully. It had not been, confirmed prior to my escape that there were any other similar successful escapes. That doesn't mean that there weren't other Saudi women that had gone abroad and lived abroad with the consent and blessings of their family. That is a very different circumstance. But in terms of being able to basically escape without ramifications and necessarily the legal permission that is required, that was a challenge. And so I'm glad I'm here to tell the story.
Yes, that was perfect. Thank you so much. And before we get into more of your story, I wanted to read these comments from some of our viewers who did watch that first episode. We have one. I have watched many of your podcasts in the last 2 years, but this is the most interesting and intelligent guest you've ever interviewed. So happy for her that she's been able to achieve the kind of life she wants. May she live a long and happy life. So sweet. Love
Oh,
that.
that's amazing.
This
So
one
generous.
is yes. Here's another one. I get so emotional when I hear and watch the stories of women and their journeys of knowing themselves. This woman is a force. Yes, I
Wow.
agree.
Mm.
And then here's another one. As a Saudi woman from very conservative Saudi parents, this is so authentic and true, which is great to, I mean, you didn't need validation, but I think it helps when other people see comments like this and like, okay, because then you have other people on the other side that are like, she's a liar. None of this happened.
Of course.
So
Yeah.
we'll get into more of that.
Yeah.
But she says she's reading my mind and all the provocative thoughts and worries that my daughter will live this. I'm trying my hardest, but you can't rewrite the social and religious conventions independently. The good news, most generations refuse these contradictions of belittling beliefs. I believe in the future of a new generation of women and men to change these empowered by globalization and true science-based knowledge. And then the last one, because I want to go off on this tangent, is as a Saudi man, I stand with respect to this amazing, strong lady. Thankfully, Saudi is pretty much liberal now, and everything she faced in the past is no longer required. I assumed you lived in the capital. I don't know how to pronounce that. At the
Riyadh.
eight,
Riyadh. Yeah.
thanks, Riyadh, at the 80s and 90s because Jeddah and the time was way, way relaxed and less restricted. Thank you for sharing your story, my dear. So, yeah, do you want to address this comment? Because I think it's a good place to
Yes.
start.
Yeah, thank you so much, whoever sent that comment. I really appreciate that because the only way forward is to have that balance that we all want, which is not just women's voices, but also the men's voices. I say it all the time. Women are the ones who suffered maybe the majority of the outcomes of that type of imposed lifestyle, but men did as well. Young men today are figuring things out and they're working through it, and I'm glad to see that they are supporting women and they are supporting some of these freedoms and loosening of restrictions, and that's fantastic. And I know that you had Nuria Khan on recently from Holy Humanist. She lived in Jeddah, and so definitely she also recognized that in Jeddah things were a little more progressive, if you will. Uh, and in Riyadh, in the capital, things were a lot different because of all the different reasons that we may or may not get into today. But definitely the base of the country was in the capital. Political, social, religious, all of that was sort of the hub was in the capital, even though the religious and spiritual practices were happening more in the Western province, which is where Mecca and Medina are. But that's a very different approach to how they handled that piece in terms of just stripping it down to the basics of practice and religion. Riyadh had that dichotomy of culture, tradition, the Bedouins, the tribal beliefs and systems, as well as the the religion and the culture. So I really appreciate the comment of this gentleman, because while things are changing right now, and I'm thrilled to hear that. And again, I can't speak on behalf of what's happening right now because I'm not there and I have not been there since I left. That being said, and this I've heard also in interviews from um, individuals who still live there, members of the of the governing body, who recognize that progress is coming. It takes time, and it's not 100% there where it needs to be. So I think that's also important to highlight, that even though progress is
Hmm.
happening, those changes are happening, the mentality is still there. And even though the country itself and maybe the governing body wants to make those advances, some families still live in this very, very problematically oppressive ideology.
Yeah. Yeah, that's perfectly said. And can you, for those who aren't familiar, maybe give us some idea, and those who haven't watched your first interview, what some of those things were that were so problematic and that are slowly changing, but that you really had to deal with growing up that way?
Yeah, well, so I'll start just by saying that when I was growing up, women had absolutely no freedoms, and that is a fact. It's a historic fact. Legally, women did not own IDs. We did not have our own individual identification cards. We didn't have our passports. We didn't have. We couldn't go anywhere without permission from our mahram or legal guardian. We could not, we needed consent for everything we did. And this is not just for young women. This is for a woman that's maybe 99 years old. Like, age doesn't matter. It's the gender that matters. And so women needed permission from a male guardian for every interaction, legal or social, that they wanted to experience. So this was the life. It was governed primarily by the religious police, also known as the mutawa, which comes from their mutawa means a devoted, someone that's devoted to doing righteous work for God. And so they basically ruled all social conduct. Their entire mission was to uphold virtue and to make sure that they are 100% implementing the most fundamental, extremist, radical Wahhabi ideology of the region on all citizens and visitors. So everyone that was living there at the time had to follow these, imposed laws. If you were in a compound or in the embassy or the diplomatic quarter, which was called the diplomatic quarter, you were fine. But as long as you were in society, in the everyday life of the community, you had to abide by these laws, which was women had to cover, women couldn't speak in public, women could not be in public without a male guardian, women couldn't travel without permission, going to school, all of those things. Women couldn't drive. Women now can drive since 2018, but prior to that, they could not drive. So that's kind of a highlight, I guess, of some of those anecdotes.
Yeah. Okay, great. So let's get more into your teen years then. Really dive into what it was like being a teen within these confines and within this extremist view, which we've established is now loosening. But in your specific case, let's talk about some of the hardships that you faced.
Yeah, so I mentioned in the episode that I was in the last time that a woman or a girl becomes a woman basically when she gets her period. And so the moment that period happens or she starts menstruating, everything changes. And again, uh, these are parts of maybe, the more traditional scripture. Some of it is cultural, some of it is tradition, but for the most part, the law and the religion say that when a girl starts menstruating and when a boy becomes a young man, however that's measured, they are expected to perform all religious duties like fasting and praying, and for women is wearing the hijab and covering and all of that. So those are all things that are extremely foundational in the practice of any devout Muslim. There are a lot of liberal Muslims, there are a lot of progressive Muslims all over the world and in other countries, including in the Arab world, that maybe have not in recent years or maybe even recent decades necessarily had this level of not only fundamental religion, but also kind of following to the T the scripture. So some of it has left room for interpretation. But for me, growing up, that to me was a sign that the minute I start menstruating, I'm a young lady, I am a woman, and now I have to do all of those things. And so becoming an adolescent during that time with all that was brewing in my head between my interests in creativity, I was very artistic. I loved dancing. I loved playing music. I loved performing. Those were all things that I had absolutely no outlets for. You couldn't do it in public. You couldn't do it in private, kind of in your bedroom, but like there was no way to really go and express your innate passions. And then, of course, you can tell I'm a talker. There were no ways for me to process thoughts and to be able to intellectualize big questions, deep questions. Those were all things that were extremely taboo. And so you couldn't ask. You basically had a manual as to how to live your life. And part of that manual was enjoying gossip with friends, going to parties, talking about really mundane or very, very very superficial things. That's not to say that there weren't many intellectuals and very intelligent, young people and older people. There were, and there still are. They're a very, very bright society. But you're not going to put yourself at risk if you feel like talking about it will get you in trouble. So for me, my teen years were literally balancing the act of being, a person in public that does not want to attract attention, that covers, that does everything that, the whole society tells me to do and what my friends are also doing, many of them enthusiastically. And on the other hand, in my head and in my thoughts, wanting to be a totally different person, and coming to terms with the fact that there were not opportunities for me to be able to exercise that.
Yeah. Were you religiously devout mentally and just wanting to get away from the rules? Like, did you still believe in the doctrine itself?
No. So so that's a great question, and people ask me that all the time, and that's one of the reasons that I don't necessarily. I mean, I don't. I'm really not attached to any labels. I've never looked at myself and considered myself an ex anything, an ex Muslim, or an because I you have to be. You have to feel devout to something to once you leave it feel like an ex or a
Mm,
former or whatever. For me, it's like so let me just say, at the time that I was born, every Saudi citizen was born a Muslim. That was not a choice. You did not get to pick your religion. You did not get to, if you were a Saudi citizen, you had to be Muslim. So essentially, during that time, on paper, 100% of Saudi Arabian citizens were Muslim. That was a law. And so there was no choosing it. But as you get older and you start thinking and processing, none of it spoke to me. None of it made sense to me. And it is surprising to me how much people are baffled by the fact that I didn't take stock in understanding the religion more or reading it or studying it. I had 7 subjects exclusively dedicated to Islamic studies when I was in school, from first grade to 12th grade. I have studied the religion very much. I have, again, 7 subjects. So I have read the Quran many times. I have read the hadiths many times, which are the Prophet's sayings. I have read the interpretations, both the moderate and the conservative interpretations. I have looked at the different sects and lineages, and it still does not speak to me. So,
yeah. I think that's something worth mentioning because a lot of people are saying, well, you just didn't really understand it, or I'm sorry that you didn't understand it enough to know the true religion, which let me just say, everyone is more than welcome to believe whatever you want to believe. I'm not here to tell you what to
absolutely.
believe or what not to believe. However, I think it's kind of a cop out to just say, well, she just didn't get it and that's why she doesn't follow it. Especially when you did research and do everything that you did to learn about it, and you're just like, no, it just doesn't make sense for me. And I feel like that's one of the things that we need to recognize when people are choosing what speaks to them is just let them do what feels right, and that's really individual sovereignty. That's what we preach. This whole
Yeah,
podcast is just about do what feels right to you. If you are in control of your being, if this is what you are doing and no one is forcing you, no one is guilting you, no one is shaming you into doing something, that's great. Do you, boo. So for
absolutely. Can
you,
I add one
Jasmine,
thing?
yes,
Yeah.
please.
No, so I just want to say, because I love that you're taking a moment here to say that, and that's one of the reasons I love your channel so much, is you are definitely intending to be respectful while also validating people's experiences. Some of them, victims, some of them, maybe not, but or speaking on behalf of victims. So I think it's really important to validate that. The other thing I wanted to say was specifically to this. I have my opinions about all religions. My goal is not necessarily to come and talk about all the horrors of a religion. That's my business. That's whatever my theology process has been or continues to be. I have a lot of opinions, but I don't find it necessarily my calling to speak to that, to deconstruct that, and to go after that, because I do believe what you just said. People are entitled to make the choices. If women are happy with that level of structure and control, honestly, that's fantastic. It did not work for me. And so what I'm, trying to shed light on is that we ought to be given sole agency over our decisions, both spiritual, physical, emotional, and all of those things. So you will not necessarily ever hear me bash Islam or any other religion, even though me personally, I am not a fan of any religion.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting what I found in the comments, and this is not just your video, but multiple videos. Sometimes when speaking the truth of your own personal story, people are like, why are you trying to slander X, Y, or Z religion? And I find it interesting and telling that just speaking the truth to them as slander. I'm like, if you think that that's slanderous, maybe you should look at your religion because she's just talking about what happened. So if you don't agree with that, then maybe let's rewind and deconstruct that a little bit. So, from your perspective as a teen, you weren't jiving with any of it, but you were forced to conform, and we talked about why in your interview. So, I think a big part of this, though, is you kind of had a double life when you were allowed to go to Italy and wear different clothes and experience things in a different way, which helped you realize that there was another way to live. And so, do you
Mhm.
want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we traveled to Italy, I didn't have to wear the abaya, which is the black cape and the cover and all of that. So I did not have to wear any of that while we were, abroad. Um, my parents still preferred that I wear, long pants and not necessarily long sleeves, but not tank tops and shorts. And my parents were very modest. My mom, even though she was Italian, she still comes from a very modest, traditional Southern Italian family, even though she grew up in Florence. And, and my father, I don't think my father really deep inside cared, but I think he was torn between his commitment to his culture as well. And
Mm-hmm.
so when we traveled, I was okay with being able to just wear jeans and t-shirts, and that was fine enough by me. I didn't have to cover. But then when I'd go back to Saudi Arabia, I'd have to, always leave the house covered from head to toe. In many, many gatherings with specific, even just women, we had to dress not just very modest, but almost traditional. So anytime I was with my father's family, my Saudi relatives, um, extremely traditional family, very, very traditional. We had to amp it up to another level, the level of traditional conforming. And so it wasn't just religious. At this point, it was also very, very traditional and very, very old fashioned, if you will. So I had to wear long dresses, long sleeves. The one thing that my mom, never had us do was cover our heads when we were inside, like indoors. A lot of women wear the hijab all the time. And that's, again, for many of them, it's a choice. So yes, I know, ladies, you have chosen, you love it, you're proud of it, it's beautiful, fantastic. For many, it is a choice. For others, it's not a choice. And so for me, it was definitely not a choice, nothing I ever entertained. And so, but with our relatives, there was this thing that when girls became young women and got their periods and whatever, like, it's not like you announce it. I guess they make assumptions when that is, and it's usually around the age of 10 or 11. Girls have to cover from all of their male cousins, any of the males that they could marry. And yes, they do marry first cousins. So any of the males that you can marry, you have to cover from, regardless of age, regardless of status. The only men young girls did not have to cover from were, father, obviously, brothers, uncles, grandparents, great grandparents, or grandfathers, great grandfathers, extended uncles. Again, anyone that you wouldn't marry. And I know that that's a stretch because you're like, well, you wouldn't marry your cousin too, but you do there. So
And
whatever the
specifically men. You don't have to
oh,
cover from women.
well, let me get to that because I'm glad
Okay.
you said that. 'Cause that sparked another thing in me. So yes, officially men, and that is covering everything. Now, according to the interpretations that I was taught, women had to cover everything except for their face and their hands. This was the more lenient interpretation in Saudi Arabia at the time. But the more fundamental interpretation, which was the interpretation of the religious police and many other people, you had to cover everything. And not just cover, but the cape had to go over your head so that the shape of your neck is also not visible. So you basically what we see like women in Iran. So that's kind of what that looked like for many. So we never covered. I never covered in front of my cousins. Um, and that caused problems because I had some cousins who were very insulted and offended and would not say hello to me or my sister because we weren't covered. They'd say hello to all of our other cousins and the wives of our uncles, all the women that in the room. And this is an episode that did happen, and I highlighted in the book where women and men sit separately in homes there. So the women are in the women's living room and the men are in the men's living room. And when the women are together, they're not covered. But when a man wants to come and say hello, out of respect to all the women, it's very traditional, they clear their throat before they approach the living room so that the women know there's a man approaching and they all cover. And so then he'll come in, not make any eye contact with anyone because how can he? Everyone's covered. Except for like his sister, his mom, women that don't cover from him would be there. And he would then say hello to every single one and greet them. And so this episode happens once. We're at my uncle's house, we're with all my cousins and aunts and all that. And one of my elder cousins, a lot older than me, I was probably 11 or 12, did the clearing of the throat, the women all covered. He walks in, says hello to everyone. And when it came to, it goes one by one as we're seated, he said hello to my mother, who was not covered. But my mom's Italian, and they all kind of accepted her in a different way. Said hello to her in English, not even in Arabic, which she spoke fluent Arabic. So it was kind of and then completely ignored my sister and I and kept going. And my mom said to him, "Why didn't you say hello to my daughters?" And he said, "When they cover like they should, I will say hello to them." And then he just kept saying hello to everyone else. And so that was the last time I was, visiting my uncle's house with my cousins that way, because it was a profoundly insulting excuse for, young girls. I wasn't even a teenager yet at the time.
Mm,
And my mom, while my mom was very conforming and very adaptable, she did have some lines where she would draw and say, "You know what? All of that is fine and dandy. I will have my daughters, assimilate and also, adopt the traditions, but not in the family and not in this way."
yeah. Yeah, in your book, which I don't even think we mentioned yet. Stupid.
All good, all good.
The last Sandstorm, do you have it next to you that you could hold up so people could see? I should have asked
Uh
you before.
oh, I
It's okay
do.
if you don't.
Oh,
Okay.
here it is.
There you go. Everyone go
Oh,
check it out. The Last Sandstorm. Go read her
can I
book.
just say thank you for
Yes.
that? It's sold out on Amazon. I don't know when they're getting it back, so yay, but also it's frustrating. It is available from Book Baby Bookstore, which is the publishing company. And if you go now and use the code Sandstorm, all lowercase, 50%, 15% off. Um, and then
Ooh,
and then
okay.
in next month, I'm hoping to bring it back up to the full price. And I really am working on sending some of the proceeds to benefit women. And I'm happy to share more when I finally identify which organization I want to work with to do some of the proceeds to go towards that. So just highlighting that as well.
Awesome. Yeah, that's great. So I was going to mention that when I was reading that part of the book, it's so amazing that your mom had the perceptiveness, if that's even a word, to be like, hey, we're not going to go to this cousin's house anymore because of the way that you were disrespected, even though he thought you were the one being disrespectful. I found it really refreshing that she's like, no, hard pass. They can come to our
Mhm.
house if they
Yeah,
want to see us.
that's exactly
So,
what she said. And my dad
oh, it's
agreed.
so
So
amazing. Yeah. So let's talk more about ways. Actually, I think we need to do some questions because it's been a minute, and I'm
yeah.
sorry, guys, who are watching live. I haven't been ignoring you on purpose. Okay, let's do some questions. Jasmine, how do your sons feel about how you were raised, especially your eldest who spent time growing up in SA2?
Ah, well, so they're very intrigued. They love, hearing me talk about it and sharing my stories. Of course, they're very, you know, proud of me, but proud. I mean, that's their word, but I guess they're proud because, um, well, I guess because they come from a generation where this is unfathomable to them. So for them to be able to accept that a woman would allow to be treated this way, or to not, make the decisions for herself, is for them, it's mind blowing to them. And so yeah, I think they're very intrigued. They're fascinated by it. I share a lot of the wonderful things, not just, the challenging things. They are curious about some of it. And yeah, and my oldest spent a little bit of time there, but no memory of it necessarily.
Okay. Oh, that's great. Okay. Do you have another question, Jonathan, that you want to put up? Kayla wants to know, how are people with disabilities required to dress and the lifestyle? Oh, that's such a great question.
Wow, that's such a great question. I don't know about today, but when I was there, I remember there were, well, first of all, okay, this one's going to be a trigger for a lot of people, but here I go. Uh, so disability was treated in two ways, in two very extreme ways. Either it had a lot of support and a lot of devotion from charity organizations, most of them headed, is that the word, by princesses, that really that was their mission, that was their their commitment was to work with charities of disabled children, especially. And so there was a lot of work put into that, both financially and just like providing programs and support. But in society, outside in public, you did not see a lot of disability. I think there was, I don't want to say shame, but there was a lot of protectiveness around it. And so at the time, it wasn't necessarily, and I believe that that's the case probably in most of the world. It wasn't just a unique to Saudi Arabia thing where we weren't very equipped to handle, folks with disabilities and their needs and make sure that we provide that. But when those people were in public, they were dressed traditionally like anyone else, even if they were in a wheelchair or if they had to walk with a cane or a crutch or whatever that is. I mean, they dressed traditionally.
Okay.
Great question.
All right. Any other questions? Okay. You guys can leave your questions in the chat. It's amazing how she never became indoctrinated. I wonder what the difference is that makes someone more susceptible.
Wow.
Thoughts?
Okay, yes. So and it's the reason why your channel was brought to my attention is I'm obsessed with cults. I have studied cults, not just enthusiastically down the Wikipedia rabbit hole, but I genuinely studied cults and have done some of my graduate school work on cults. And the reason why is because I think cults are, well, first of all, I think anything we experience right now, almost socially, is some form of a cult. There's a lot of that, and we can get into that either today or some other day. But so from when I was very, very young, it baffled me that that we couldn't ask questions. I think that's probably the one. And I remember my parents, who meant well, would often tell me, just like, avoid asking too many questions. Don't ask questions. The teachers at school would say, don't ask those questions. Those are inappropriate. We don't ask those questions. So I think for me, it started very early on when I was, as a child. I mean, think of a child, a 2-year-old and a 3-year-old, and Shelise, you'll find out very soon. All they say is why, like
Yeah.
9,000 times an hour. And so when I couldn't say why or how or what, that I think was for me at a very young age, a light bulb red flag. So I think that answers that question.
Yeah. So as a teen, being kind of put in this box that you did not want to be in, seeing the world in Italy and realizing that that's what you wanted for yourself, what were some of the other challenges that you faced that were specific to your situation where you're just like, I do not want to do this lifestyle anymore because of A, B, or C?
Well, so I will say, and I talk a little bit about this in my book. So because we belong to a community of similar kids like us that were half Saudi and half, Western American, Italian, German, wherever the mom was from, we had our little community, and we jokingly called ourselves the halfies. And so I grew up with them, and it was boys and girls all together until I hit that teen threshold, until that age 12, 13, where my parents decided that in order to conform to more of the traditional part of my dad's family and the traditional part of society, that wasn't a good idea for the girls to continue to mix in that environment. Now, a lot of the rest of them in the group continued to mix together, and they still today are great friends. They've become aunts and uncles to each other's kids, those who got married. They're a community that has had probably wonderful memories from their teen years. I unfortunately was deprived of that. And for me, that was one of the hardest things to come to terms with, because just wanting to be able to normally socialize with other people. It didn't only have to be boys, but especially boys, but also girls that were in that situation, and just being normal without the need to do anything that was inappropriate or promiscuous. And I say this in the context of that culture. Obviously, the rest of the world, there's nothing wrong with teenagers getting to know each other a little more intimately. And so for me, that was really, really hard, because I felt deeply isolated. My choices then became very limited as to who my friends were. And when I was with those friends who were half, like me. It was just the girls, and I would hear them talk about, that party when we all went. And by the way, the parents were at those parties. It wasn't just the teenagers alone, much like what Nuria described in the boarding school, or not the boarding school, but the international school system, which was a little different. For this community that I'm referring to, it was usually parties with the parents, and it was just like all very normal and very, very benign. So that was really, really hard for me.
Were there any times that you had a crush and you got caught like messaging him or or passing notes or something?
So, well, first of all, there was no way to pass notes because we were completely segregated. There was no
Oh, that's
messaging because
right.
I grew up in the era before the internet, so there was no texting, no phone. Um, I think when I was in high school, the pager came about, and so boys had the pager, and so you can page him a number, and then he can call you back. So I never got involved in that. I would say the majority of my friends were involved in that, and for them it was, they needed to do that. I completely understand why. I heard their stories, and it was very, very secretive and very dangerous, honestly. But I never felt called to that. And I know I addressed this in the last episode. I just did not feel like, first of all, it didn't feel sincere. It didn't feel worth the risk. I also really respected my parents, and I didn't want to do anything that would have disappointed them. So, no, I never actually did until I
Mm,
met the young men that eventually I married, which, that was a little more orchestrated and a little more traditional. But in terms of just like having fun and crushing on boys, that was all in Italy, not in Saudi Arabia. I crushed on boys in Italy from a distance.
yeah.
So
I think that speaks to who your parents are as people because it seems to me that the more that the parents are so restrictive and heavy punishments, like physical punishments, and just really tightly gripping their children, the more they want to rebel. And it seemed like you had such a great respect for your parents in that way because you had mentioned that at home things were a little bit more relaxed, but when you go out, this is when you have to follow the rules. So I think it's really great that you had that connection with your parents and still felt like you were okay with following the rules in some ways.
yeah, I love my parents, and I didn't feel, I know a lot of people have criticized my parents, and especially my mom. I had no animosity towards my parents whatsoever. They were and are loving parents. My father passed away, but uh, of course there were problems like any young person that gets frustrated about, how mom does this or dad does this. And of course there were frustrations. I wished I would have gotten to know my dad more intimately. My father was very closed off and very introverted. My mom, while extremely bright and validated so many of my thoughts and feelings, also had a boundary where she would be like, nope, we're not discussing that. That is not negotiable. So those were all things that I think any normal young person experiences. But my parents really, they meant well. They did not do this to me. They didn't know what they were getting themselves into when they had children and raised them in 1970s, 80s, and 90s Saudi Arabia.
Mm, right. Okay, let's see if there's any more questions. How did friends and those around you respond to your initial doubts and questions about the culture? Did you talk to your friends
Um,
about it?
Not very many and not very often. I think maybe a couple of my very, very, very best friends who shared those feelings as well. But no, so one thing I really recommend if people have not heard of the term code switching or also simulation, go look it up. We all do it a little bit in different capacities and formats, and that's the educator in me coming out now. But for me, my life was completely based on code switching all the time. So depending on who I was with, I would have to switch and kind of be more like them. I was literally a chameleon for survival, and because th- you just couldn't. I mean, if you rebelled, that there were so many risks that came with that, so many. So it wasn't worth risking even sharing my thoughts and my ideas. In fact, I've had people message me after uh, my first uh, my first episode with you, and blasts from the past that I don't necessarily, several that I don't necessarily have any relationship with, that maybe knew me, and they were surprised to hear some of the things that I
Oh,
shared.
wow. That's cool. Getting a
Yeah.
DM from someone like, I saw you online.
Yeah, yeah, and it's like, "I had no idea you were so unhappy." Well, I wasn't necessarily unhappy, but I was frustrated and unhappy, but not all the time. I mean, I didn't fake
Yeah.
my fun times when I was having fun with my friends. I wasn't a miserable, pouty kid. I really tried to do my very best.
Mm-hmm. And what were some of those punishments? Because you said a couple times it wasn't worth the risk. So what would have happened if you would have broken many rules?
So externally in society, that's when the religious police come in. That's when they decide what the sin, what the crime is. If they suspect adultery, punishable by death. If you're married, or stoned to death. If you're not married, then lashes, 80 lashes. And that's the religious interpretation. So that was in terms of punishment from, the law, which is the constitution of Saudi Arabia, up until I remember, is the Quran. So the law is founded on the Sharia law, which is the Quran. So that was one of the ways that I could put myself at risk, being caught with a boy, all of that. It wasn't worth it in public. As far as my parents go, I think I would have lost their respect, which would have been deeply, deeply hurtful and difficult. And I know people are going to say, well, you ran away. How's that for caring about what your parents think? When I was younger, it was a little different, because when you're a child and you are um, in your parents' home, and you're abiding by their rules, and they're raising you, and you're still very, very dependent on them, it's a little different to put yourself in the jeopardy of making the choices for yourself, and being willing to take the risk with it. When I chose to leave, I was already a full grown adult. I was 25 years old. I had already been married and divorced. And so I, I felt like I had authority over myself and made that decision. But as a young
Mm-hmm.
person, none of that was worth losing my parents' respect or my relationship with my parents at that point.
Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about your accent or your lack of accent. According to
Yeah.
some commenters, they were just blown away that you didn't have an accent.
Yeah. So I will say, first of all, and I say this, I'm trying to be non-facetious here, but that is such a prejudice comment, because first of all, it stereotypes Arabs immediately. It's also a rich comment coming from most likely a lot of people who only speak one language. I think it's a little, again, not the most charitable comment for some of them, because some of them were literally saying that I'm a liar because I never grew up there.
Yeah.
There's no way with this accent that I have. Some of them genuinely asked, how does she have an accent, or not have an accent, uh, you know, speaking English. And I know that some of those were genuine. And so thank you for that. And I'm happy to highlight that. So I grew up speaking 3 languages fluently. Italian is my first language because it's my mom's language. I learned English second, and then Arabic third, because my mom wanted to make sure that we were fluent and spoke like natives in all the languages that we were lucky enough to have. And so I don't remember learning a language specifically, because they were all fluently around me, spoken by natives. I went to a private school, and so all my teachers were either American or British or Irish. So I was surrounded by native speakers. I also, in my community of friends who were halfies like me, we all spoke English together because that was our common language, not Arabic. And of course, we watched movies and music, and we were very influenced by American culture. So I, yeah, that's the reason. And I will say, this is not unique to me. Many, many young people from the Gulf region, which is Saudi Arabian Peninsula and the countries around, speak English very, very well, if not perfectly. So it's a lot more common to see non-Americans speak English really well. I think Americans have this idea that
So
it's
funny.
not a very common thing, but people are educated all over the world and have learned the language fairly well.
Yeah. That's it's just funny. Like, wow, you can learn. Fancy that. Okay. All right. Oh, Whitney, thank you so much for your super chat. So appreciated. I was just going over to do those. Thank you so much for your donation. We have another one here. How Aphrodite Dancer, how do you see yourself helping women escaping these situations in the future? So much love to you. I appreciate you speaking out. Please keep it up. Thank you.
Wow. Yeah, that's a tough question, because I do get this question very often of, like, what can I do? What do you recommend? And um, that's a huge, huge. I will leave that to the people who have really dedicated their life work to being involved in organizations that do that. I'm not going to pretend that I have the answer, kind of a holistic answer to that. What I will say is, on a personal level, you will know when you're ready and when it's time. You will know when you're willing to take that risk. And I just say, really listen to yourself. If your innate deep gut is telling you there's a problem here. I'm struggling with the things that I'm hearing, with the things that I'm being told I need to do. And you have a window to make that choice for yourself. Trust that gut. Things will eventually figure themselves out. But uh, I wouldn't put, I wouldn't recommend putting your life in danger, even though, I did that. But I think your intuition will tell you when the time is right. If you're having any questions or doubts, just follow that gut.
Yeah, such good advice. Do you, off the top of your head, I should have asked you beforehand before we got on the live, but do you know of any resources that specifically help women?
No, not off the top of my head. I know I'm familiar with some that I've looked into, or friends that have worked with some. Not off the top of my head right now, but it's tricky because where I come from, or the era that I come from. I mean, no country wants to touch a certain part of the world. I can tell you right now, a lot of countries do not want to necessarily get into that situation with Saudi Arabia at the time. Things I know have changed now, and I think Saudi Arabia is building its international rapport. But at the time, when I was, a lot of the questions, by the way, that I also saw, why didn't I just use my Italian passport, seeing that I would have been entitled to Italian citizenship? Because to issue a passport, if you are dual citizen from any other country in Saudi Arabia, as a Saudi woman, only women, you have to have permission from your legal guardian at the time. So no embassy would have granted any Saudi woman her uh, her legal citizenship right to a passport without the permission of a legal guardian from Saudi Arabia. That's the understanding and the agreement that Saudi Arabia had with all the countries of the world in that time.
Mm, okay. Speaking out now. Speaking out is more than enough. Yes. Oh, whoops. Jonathan and I did it at the same time. Okay, this person, thank you so much for the super chat. We appreciate you. Bulasat, I've probably pronounced that wrong. How do Muslims in Saudi Arabia or the Middle East see other Muslims who, for example, are Asian? I know friends who work there but are not Arab.
Mhm. So thank you. That question is actually a great opportunity to highlight the fact that, and I know I said it in the other episode, and some people appreciate it, other people's got very indignant about it. But there's a huge confusion between religion, culture, nationality, ethnic, racial, all of those identities. Muslims are a religion. You can be of any background, ethnicity, race, nationality, speak any language, and still be Muslim. So that's a religion. And there are Muslims all over the world. In fact, probably the largest concentration and growing population is in Asia, Southeast Asia specifically, because Saudi Arabia is technically in Asia as far as geographical continent, but it's not considered an Asian country as we know Asian countries to be. Um, and actually, may I also bring the comment of other people also feeling a little indignant about the fact that I said that we don't talk about race there.
Mm-hmm.
That is
Yeah.
very different from it is not racist. I never said it wasn't racist. I use the word race as a noun, as a label, not as a verb and as an action. There is a lot of racism in that part of the world. Absolutely. There's racism all over the world. But in that part of the world, the racism and the prejudice is equal to misogyny. So very, very true, and especially towards countries who are from Southeast Asia, Eastern, Eastern countries, and whether they're Muslim or not, there's a lot of discrimination. I hope that's not the case anymore, but there was certainly when I was growing up, and part of that is because a lot of those countries are poor, and their citizens come to the Gulf region, Saudi Arabia, and the neighboring countries to work as help, either drivers or maids, nannies, and so they're looked at as less than, and so I would say there have been problems with the treatment of folks from other non-Arab Muslim countries. I'm hoping
Mm,
and I'm assuming it's not the case anymore, but there's a
yeah.
history of it.
Okay.
Mhm.
Well, thank you for explaining that. Are there any other comments that you wanted to address from your original interview?
Hmm. Oh, we talked about a couple, and now I'm trying to remember.
There was the accent. There, she's lying because she doesn't have an accent. Uh, oh, here's one. Well, Jonathan has a question on the screen, so I'll do that after this question.
Okay.
Okay, Kestrel42, how is your relationship with your sister now? Does she understand why you needed to leave?
Oh my gosh, my sister is my soulmate. She is my best human in the world. She's literally like a piece of me. and we are extremely close. She also lives in the United States now, so we are not only emotionally close, but we're also physically close. We see each other. In fact, I'm going to see her this weekend. We don't live in the same state, but we're very close, and we're very, very close. And it was hard when I left. It was very, very hard because it did break the bond that we had. And when I left, we did not leave. I did not leave when we were on good terms. There were other things going on. So that was hard, and didn't take very long for us to rebuild our bond. And we are closer than ever. Thank
Oh,
you for
that's
that
so
question.
great.
Yeah.
Are there other family members who you were able to reconnect with? Because, well, let me start with how cut off were you from family members when you left, and then have you been able to reconnect since?
Yeah. So when I left, I didn't see. So when I left, I was here on my own before I saw any of my family members. At least 3 years. Um, Almost 3 years. And then I saw my mom after about 2.5 years, 3 years. She came to visit. And then after that, after my sons were born, um, and I had all three of my boys, my brother came and visited. And that's when he and I had a really beautiful reconciliation. And so he and I are very close. He also lives in the States. We're uh, very, very close, both emotionally and get to see each other very often. And then and my mom. So I'm still very close to my mom as well. And my mom travels. She, she spends time here. She was here recently, so she comes and goes. But yeah, I can say that I've, for the most part, because our foundation as a family was built on real love, despite our differences in how we viewed who we wanted to be or how we succumbed to society. I will say that me leaving, gave permission for everyone to just, you know, be okay with not being the perfect societal norm that other
Mm,
people placed upon us. So
yeah. Well, that's
yeah,
great.
and
I'm
my
glad
dad's
you were
passed
able to
away. So,
reconnect.
yeah,
Right.
yeah,
So I remembered what it was because so many of the comments, and not just on your video, on a lot of the videos of us covering Islam are saying that this is specifically in singularly, that's not a word, singularly, I got there, guys, a cultural issue and not a religious issue. And I'm really curious about your opinion on that, having studied the Quran like you did.
Yes. Okay. So yes, many people were saying that, and I tried to respond to as many as I can. I prefaced and I said this before. I will say it again. What I grew up with is a combination and a mixture of culture, tradition, and religion. All of those three things intertwined. That being said, um, in the scripture, a lot of the things that are practiced, like the conservatism of women and their place in society, is part of the scripture. I mean, you can't argue that. Now, you can interpret it differently or you can modernize it. And that's wonderful that now a lot of Islamic countries are choosing that path and are bringing, I guess, Islam to the modern era. And that's important, especially if you find a lot of other good things in the faith that you have chosen to practice. But to say that it's not in the scripture in some capacity, I mean, it's there. I'm not making it up, and that's factual. And when you mix that with also traditions, you kind of have a perfect storm. So that's my answer to that. Yes, I know it is a combination of things. Yes, I know that only few countries up until recently practiced fundamental extremism, Wahhabism of Islam, which Saudi Arabia is one of them. I know Iran is another country that practices extremely fundamental and oppressive version interpretation of Islam. I know they're not the majority, but they do exist, and you cannot dismiss the fact that those stories have happened. We are here to document history. We're here to talk about how the past impacted what we are dealing with now. And if change is part of that impact, that's wonderful. But unless we
Hmm.
choose to address it and accept that this is part of our history, you cannot dismiss and squash people who have been through it. It would be like, telling any victim, well, it's over now. You're not being perpetrated anymore, so you should be fine. No, you seek all the resources to support them and get them through it. And part of that is not only speaking, but it's validating and acknowledging that these things did happen, and it's documenting them so that they never happen again.
Yes. Praise Jasmine. I will follow you if you start a cult. I'm so glad that you said that because it drives me crazy when it's so invalidating, like you said, when people are like, well, it doesn't happen anymore, so she just needs to shut up about it. And that's not just you, that's everybody we've
Mhm.
ever had on the podcast, right? Someone will say, well, things are different. Why are you trying to slander an entire religion? We're not slandering. Slandering is never the goal here. The goal is to shed light on the dark underbelly of these religions, of these groups, not always religions either, groups, people,
Yeah.
specifically, even family cults. I think it's
Yeah.
so worth bringing this to light so others can give themselves permission to say, I had a similar experience and I realize now that it was not okay and maybe I should get some help with that. Maybe I should deconstruct some of my thoughts and patterns and belief systems. Maybe I should rethink things. Maybe I should look at things in a new perspective. All of that is so important. And there's only progressivism because people are speaking out and they're not okay with
Yeah.
how things were. Things are never going to get better if no one ever says, hey, I don't like that, or hey, this was abusive and wrong and it shouldn't be happening anymore. It's so important to talk about the past so we can move forward and be a healthier society. And again, this is not to we do not bring light to these situations so people can say, oh, yeah, thanks to this video, I hate all Muslims now. Absolutely not. That is never, ever, ever something that we want. We are not trying to divide people. We are trying to enlighten others into what's going on in the world so that they can have more compassion for people who are involved in this. Or have a better understanding of how someone wishes to practice and how someone wishes to live their life or how someone did live their life. It's all about finding new perspectives, growing your sense of just being a better human, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. And I've just gone off on a rant, but it's just so
I
important for
love it.
people to understand that we
Yeah.
are just trying to give a platform to people who can share their stories in a safe space where they can feel supported, where they can feel seen and validated, and where we can hopefully, because of them and their bravery that you included, build a better and healthier society and rant here.
I love the rant. I don't want to clap because the mic will not like me clapping, but I clap silently. And I want to add, actually, there was one other thing that kept coming back over and over and over in the comments, and it's literally tied to what you just said. So a lot of people enjoyed my talk last time, were all in until at the end I said that I work in DEI. That's when I lost them. And it's like, oh my gosh, that's a DEI is a cult in and of itself. Yeah, I don't disagree. It is. There are problems in DEI, which is why I do work in DEI. And I will stay in DEI until I feel like I have the power and the ability to make changes. So if I can take 1 second here and address this,
Yeah.
if I may, we still have a minute.
Yeah.
What I'd like to say about that is diversity, equity, and inclusion is what DEI is for those who may not be familiar. So diversity, equity, and inclusion was founded on a very necessary action. And I know some disagree, and that's okay. But the foundations of DEI are meant to address a balance in society that is inclusive of everybody. It is not meant to be one-sided, to lean only to the left or only to the right or only for said identity or said group of people. DEI is literally meant to bring the diversity of our society, to create equity within those diverse backgrounds, and to then form an inclusive society. And so I am working tirelessly to make sure that that happens. That includes hearing from the marginalized, the privileged, and the in-betweens. So everyone has a voice in this because the privileged have power to help us make this a better balanced society, and the marginalized need to be heard, and all the in-betweens. I will say to everything you just said, Shelise, if anyone looked at my YouTube or my history, they would probably think that first of all, they'd be confused about my political leanings. And I will say I'm open about the fact that I am a liberal. I do not recognize the Democratic or and I know we don't go political here, but I'm just going to share this because it's in context. I don't necessarily recognize the left right now and everything they're doing and saying. And I do want to understand what the conservative side and the right wing and all that, what they're thinking and saying, not because I want to mock them and not because I want to attack them, but because I really want to understand what it is that upsets them so much or triggers them so that I can do my work better as an advocate. I've been an activist wonderful time of my life. Now I'm an advocate because my goal is to bring people together. So the whole thing about only listening to people you agree with is a cult. And then also going to find the people you don't agree with just to get in their face, attack them, insult them. You
Mm,
know what? People don't have to come to your channel and listen to all of these. If they're triggered, and everyone's triggered right now, if they're triggered, literally they can go find things that are more like-minded and soothe their soul. But if they are
yeah.
curious to know how the world functions, listen to opposing views and to maybe views who are criticizing what you believe in. It's okay.
Yes, absolutely. There's a comment that I perpetually say, and I should just save it in my phone at this point so I can copy and paste it. But anytime someone says, well, that she's not telling the truth because that wasn't my experience, I had a beautiful experience, and name your cult here. And I always say, your good experience does not discount her negative experience, just as her negative experience doesn't discount your experience. It's a beautiful thing.
Yes,
Two things can be true at once. And it's okay that your experience was great. And it's okay that you choose to live that way. But she doesn't, and she didn't have a good experience. So let's just be open minded and let's be compassionate and let's just be supportive in recognizing that there are multiple ways to do one single thing. And it's always going to be that way, especially when it comes to religion. People are going to practice in fundamental ways, people are going to practice in progressive ways, and so many shades in between. And that's totally fine. But we can't sit back and say, well, just because my experience was good, that doesn't mean hers didn't exist. You know what I mean? It's just this
absolutely.
contradiction. But anyways, this is so great.
No,
Do we have
here,
any more
here, here, here.
questions? Do we have any more questions? Lori says, amazing story and exhibits such strength. So glad you were able to escape and be free. I cannot imagine having to live under that kind of oppression and power towards women.
Thank
I
you so
agree,
much.
Lori. Thank you for using your voice, says Tara. Thank you guys for being here. We really appreciate you coming and spending your time with us. Oh, here's one. It's a great book. Get it.
Woohoo!
Go get the book. Go get the book. Is it on Kindle? That's a good question.
It is on Kindle.
Oh,
Yeah,
it is on
it's
Kindle,
on.
says Michelle.
Yeah. Oh, awesome. I love that. I've got people answering. It's not on
Yeah, that's
Audible though. I did
awesome.
see someone ask about that. I just have to get it done on Audible, but it's
You
not.
have to do it. And you have to
I
do
know
it in
I
your own
do.
voice because it would be
I
great.
know. I will work on that.
Yes. All right. Well, thank you guys so much for coming. Thank you, Jasmine. Where can everyone find you in your socials and your channel?
Yes. So first of all, thank you so much, Shelise and Jonathan, for being here, for existing, for doing this, for providing this for people. You guys are amazing. Thank you. Thank you for having me back. I have a website. It's www.jasminfaulk-dickerson.com. Just my full name, no dashes. I'm probably most active on Instagram. I just rebooted my well, my YouTube channel is getting ready to be kicked off again. I yeah. So my YouTube channel should be on the horizon coming up, but you'll find most of that information either on my Instagram or my YouTube, or I'm sorry, my Instagram or my website. I'm not active on many of the other platforms. I'm not on Twitter or X. I'm not on Facebook. I have a page, but I'm not active on it. I do love getting emails though. So please feel free to send me emails. The info is on my website. You can either submit it as an inquiry or as an email directly. Yeah, so I look forward to hearing from everyone.
Yay! And as Jonathan just put on the screen, all of the links and relevant things are in the description. If you just want to click, you can do that. And yes, this was so great. Oh, that's so nice. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here. Thank you, Jasmine. You're incredible. Keep speaking out, doing your thing.
Likewise,
It's been
likewise.
great.
Thank you.
Of course. All right, guys. Well, if you like this video, make sure and go watch her full interview. It's great. It should also be in the description. And we have a whole bunch of other interviews that we've done on Islam as well. You can find those. We have a playlist where you can just go through all of them if you want to do that. And, you know, all the regular things like subscribe. It's really helpful when you subscribe, interact with the video, especially after it's been posted and it's no longer live. It's really helpful if you leave a comment to boost the algorithm. And subscribing tells us that you want to become an advocate for these people who are bravely coming on and sharing their stories. It really means a lot. We have Patreon if you want to do that. Patreon.com/consciousness. I can't even say my name right. I'm just trying to get through it quick. You can go to our website to get some merch if you want to do that. cultstoconsciousness.com. And what else? That's pretty much it. Thanks, guys, for being here. And until next time, follow your highest excitement, be conscious, and be well.